It's been exactly 6 days since Oklahoma carried out its first execution in more than 6 years. John Grant died by lethal injection last Thursday after the U.S. Supreme Court reversed his stay of execution. Grant was injected with a combination of 3 lethal drugs that, according to witnesses, caused him to vomit and convulse multiple times before he finally died several minutes later. Those were the same drugs used in 2 botched executions several years ago that led Oklahoma officials to temporarily pause all executions. There are 5 other men currently waiting execution in that state. Joining me now to discuss is Dale Baich, Assistant Federal Public Defender, who represents people living on death row, including John Grant. Dale, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me.
Now, you were in Oklahoma last Thursday, the night Mr. Grant was executed. Can you talk about all of the efforts that went into trying to prevent this execution?
Sure, and let me go back to 2014 when this all began. In April of that year, Oklahoma, using this drug midazolam, executed Clayton Lockett. And during that execution, we saw what we knew would happen. The drug did not work. Mr. Lockett woke up. He bucked up against the straps. He was moaning. He was talking, and it took him 45 minutes to die. And he died of a heart attack.
Wow. After
that, we filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging the Oklahoma lethal injection protocol. And that case ended up going to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 2015, the court ruled in a 5-4 decision that the plaintiffs in that initial case did not meet the very high standard to get an injunction to stay the executions. So the case went back to federal court, and executions were to resume in 2015.
So what went through your mind as you stood outside, knowing ultimately you weren't able to save your client, especially given his suffering?
Well, it's a very helpless feeling. We did not learn about what happened during the execution until it was over, and you know, to hear the AP reporter and other reporters say that your client convulsed over 24 times and vomited all over himself. Just made us, you know, feel angry. We have been saying since 2014 that this drug should not be used to carry out executions if a state is going to carry out executions. So we're hoping to be able to prove our case at a trial scheduled in February of 2022.
Now, Dale, I can only imagine what it must be like to represent clients who are facing execution. I mean, talk to me about the heaviness of it all.
It's something that you carry with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The way that the death penalty process is structured, it's almost impossible to get courts to intervene to look at the merits of the case. What we find when we get the cases 10, 15, 20 years after the client has been sentenced to death, and we do our investigation, we find out that the original trial lawyers did not do what they were supposed to do. We discover some new evidence, but the courts won't look at it because they They say that it came in too late. So the whole process is set up to make it almost impossible for a death row prisoner to get relief.
I think there's a big misperception that dying by lethal injection is quick and painless, but clearly that's not the case. I know this might be graphic, but I think it's important for viewers to understand how this process works. Would you walk us through that process and explain why it's so barbaric to kill citizens this way? I mean, aside from, I'm a big believer of getting rid of the death penalty in general, but why it's so incredibly wrong to inject these individuals with lethal potions that harm their body, that causes pain, that isn't painless like some would believe that it is.
It's not, and here's how it works. Lethal injection was actually invented in Oklahoma by a medical examiner, and he came up with a 3-drug formula using sodium thiopental, a paralytic, and potassium chloride, which causes the heart to stop. The first drug that's administered is supposed to anesthetize the person, make them unconscious, so that when the second drug is injected, a paralytic, they can't move, they can't speak, they can't breathe. I had an anesthesiologist explain it to me this way. It feels like a horse is sitting on your chest. So if that first drug does not work, the person who's being executed is going to feel that excruciating pain, and will also feel the injection of the third drug, the potassium chloride, which feels like fire going through one's veins. Now, the problem with the current Oklahoma protocol is that the first drug, midazolam, doesn't do what the state says it does. It's a sedative. It's a drug that is administered if someone is having a minor surgical procedure. So what we saw with Mr. Grant when that drug was injected, because of the sheer volume of the drug, his lungs reacted to it, and what the witnesses saw is what happens during an execution, but the paralytic usually masks what's going on.
Wow. So Dale, what's next for the 5 other men that are currently awaiting execution? I mean, does it change things now for them now that the state has botched yet another case, or another execution, that is?
Well, and let me add this. The reason Mr. Grant and the 5 other men are facing execution is because they did not affirmatively pick an alternative method of execution. This is the first time that a judge has ordered people to affirmatively choose an alternative method. They pled it, they met the legal standard, but they didn't affirmatively pick based on religious, moral, and ethical reasons. So the reason they're being executed is because they exercise their First Amendment rights or their religious liberties to not participate in their own death. So the 5 men now have an appeal pending before the 10th Circuit. We just filed our brief within the hour, and that's going to be considered by the court on an expedited basis.
Assistant Federal Public Defender Dale Baich, thank you for the important work that you're doing and for your time tonight.